Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hashtag Leadership, What's on Your Mind. Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey by bringing amazing guests with amazing stories and experts in their field. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on your podcast provider. So I'm super excited about today's guest. We are speaking to Alan. How are you doing, Alan? You okay?
I'm fine, Stuart. Thanks. Nice to see you.
Good. So we've been connected via a business networking group for several months now, and I love people that tell great stories and have got great experience, and Alan definitely fits into that category. So with no further ado, let's start the 20-minute timer. And Alan, for the people who don't know you, can you just introduce yourself, tell us where you are and what you do?
Yeah, surely. My name's Alan McKie. I'm technically a retired person now, but I'm not extinct. I always say that. I'm retired but not extinct. And I generally run my own business, which is Alan McKie Associates.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got so much to do, so much to talk about. So let's start with the first two questions. So what comes, obviously, we're Hashtag Leadership, What's on Your Mind? What comes to your mind? What's the first thing that pops up when you hear the word leadership?
Main thing, I think, first of all, leadership has many heads. I mean, that is the important thing. It's the fundamental principles, I believe, are the 3 C's. You may have heard of them, I don't know. But basically the 3 C's are consideration, caring, and courtesy. Because they seem that in leadership, we've got to be bold and rapt and you know, be out in front all the time. But in actual fact, I believe courtesy is something different. And the reason for courtesy didn't happen was when I was 13, would you believe? Because, and I thought that was my first stage of leadership. I had a mother who worked in the same factory as I did later, and my grandmother died. And I was asked basically at 13, I was old enough now to go to the funeral. It was my mother's funeral. And she said, it's tomorrow. I said, well, I can't go tomorrow. They're selecting the captain for the baseball team. And she said, oh no, you've got to go and be selected for the captain for the baseball team. When I came home and she came home from burying her mother, their first question was, did you get the captaincy of the baseball team? So I did. And that was something, I think, that was probably bred into me in some ways, not from that occasion, but that was one thing that stuck in my mind, obviously, even in this late age. That was a fact. Leadership is about trying to be the person who can take the team forward, i.e., in my case, it was the baseball team.
Yeah, amazing. I know you kind of, our second question is always like, when did your leadership journey start? So you might have, but you said about some of the fundamentals might have happened before then. What can you add to that? Like what made you even want to be the captain of the baseball team? That's where I'm probably going with that. How far back can we go to where the fundamentals of your leadership started?
I think they go back quite some way, because I'm the last of 5 children, 2 brothers. Right. 2 brothers with me who always I aspired to be better than they were, because they were always good at what they did. So the point is, you always aspire to be that. And in actual fact, that probably filtered right through to schooling, because my academic career wasn't that good. So my academic career was more about sportsmanship, because I was an athlete. 100 yards, long jump, hurdles, all those sort of things, I was good. So I was also then the vice captain of the school, which was a secondary modern school in Liverpool, but the vice captain of the school. So I think from a childhood being brought up with brothers and sisters, all older than me, therefore I had to challenge myself and find my own niche in what was I going to do and how was I going to lead the way.
Yeah, do you know what, that my sort of, I perked up there a little bit. I saw myself on the camera, body language, because I've got 4 children, and my wife and myself are very sporty. So we've got a sports theme that we are encouraging, and they love the activity, the positives in sport. And then obviously we've got Isaac, our youngest, who's 3.5 at this current moment in time. And you see that that he wants to do everything that they're doing in the aspiration. So I can imagine there's a similar thing going to be happening here. So Alan, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your leadership journey through business? I know you had a very successful HR career, and there's a few links into a country that we have had somebody on this month in Japan with the Olympics.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, give us a little bit of flavour about how you saw leadership through your career.
I think schooling started, as I said, you know, athletics, because I had to be. But I had a maths teacher, a guy called John Hamilton, and I was 15, and I was leaving school at Christmas because you left school in your birthday month. So I was 15 in October, so I left at Christmas. John Hamilton was about 28, and all our teachers in those days were ex-Army, Navy or Air Force people. They'd come out of the war and they were given education jobs to get them going in life again. John was probably about 28, I would guess. And he said, right, boys, I'm going to give you a maths lesson now. It's your last one before you leave the school. And he went onto the blackboard, as it was in those days, and said, you buy a share at this price and you sell a share at this price. Shares can go up, shares can go down. So what's most important is you will get paid a dividend on them. And that really gripped me with, you know, finance, because I wanted to get into finance. Now, later on in life, John Hamilton went on to be the leader of the Labour Party in Liverpool. And I thought, brilliant, there's a clever man who'd gone on in life. Unfortunately, his deputy leader was a guy called Derek Hatton. Now, Derek was a totally different person in terms of leadership. One was an intelligent leadership and one was a forced leadership, because he'd been brought up through trade unionism. That's the way it was. Yeah. So I think that was important. But I think more important was to learn new things. And that directed me along a path, because I ended up in HR, even though I was an engineer, because I had to be an engineer because my father said I had to be an engineer. And I went into HR by a diverse mood. I was a machine engineer, a draftsman, and then I was training apprentices. So it was important that I kept with people. And the one way in was HR. I was going to go into social services, but I ended up in HR. And in those days, HR, so we're talking 75, was closing factories down in Liverpool. So at 34, I could close a factory probably faster than anybody with 1,500 people in it. Not proud of that, but that's the way it was, because the factory had 20,000 employees making telephones. So I went through all that, and that wasn't a pleasant experience, because my family worked in the same sort of environment. Yeah. But I ended up looking for another company which had the foresight to be the top of the world, and that was the Japanese companies. And I identified a company called YKK, the zip fastener company in Runcorn. And I thought, you know what, that would be a company to work for if I could, because I could spend 5 years with them, remembering that we're talking now around about 1980. So we could spend 5 years with them and then use those skills in British companies, because Japan at the time was top of the world in terms of output. I ended up staying with that company for 20 years because they taught me so much. Yeah. And I think leadership is one of those things that you look, where can you use your leadership? And I can enlarge upon that in how I managed to use that leadership at YKK.
Yeah, so just a quick one, just to go back to, you alluded to having a challenge with closing factories, and again, just transporting back to that time and that era. I deliver a couple of workshops on challenging conversations and negotiation skills, all those sort of things. What sort of things helped you in your leadership in that time? Like, what worked regards to having those challenging conversations, and how did you deal with them as a person who was leading that process forwards?
I think that's important, Stuart. You're quite right, because quite clearly it was a challenging time. We had 20,000 employees. We were reducing down to something like 3,500 employees. One occasion, for instance, we were closing 3 factories. I was closing a factory in Speke in Liverpool, A factory in Kirby was being closed, and a factory in Wigan was being closed. And we were told about it the night we were going down to advise the trade unions that this was happening. And that was 1,500 people in each of those. And I come back to the principles, I think, of leadership, which is courtesy, consideration, those things. I'd been told on the Thursday afternoon that that evening we were advising the unions we were closing 3 factories with 1,500 people in. Before I went down to the meeting, I'd arranged with the Department of Employment to send some of their people to my factory the next morning, Friday morning. I'd arranged with pension people to send somebody to the factory the next morning. And I'd arranged with job spec people, employment agencies to send people. They didn't know why they were coming. They were just given an office in my factory, or the factory I was running as HR. And their role, once the unions had been advised the night before that we were closing that factory, when the employees walked in the next morning, they had somewhere to go to ask questions. Because I always believe when you start these things, it's trying to think what it is that people want rather than what I want. I had to close the factory. I knew what my job was, but they didn't know what their job was. So I think it is important that we consider those things. And the outcome of all that I've learned, probably being in HR, is try to think, what is it that people aren't telling me? What is it they're not telling me? What is it I should be listening to that they're telling me? Because they're telling me what they want me to hear, and that isn't what we really need. So I would suggest basically listen to that. And as a way, over the years of HR, and remember I was in it for 45 years, I had to make people redundant. That was the job. I can only recall one occasion where someone got angry about that. I even had people thanking me for making them redundant.
Right.
How stupid is that? They walked out the door and say, "Thank you, Alan." And I'm just thinking, I've just made you redundant. But obviously I must have done it in a way that was acceptable to them, to say, look, everything's okay. You're being made redundant, but you're being put in a position where it gives you the opportunity to go forward.
Yeah, amazing. And that shines through, doesn't it? Giving them the tools and communicating what they need to then make the next step. So awesome. So our audience are wanting to level up their leadership. So I would love you to share some of the things that you gained from your experience with the Japanese way, because I've heard a couple of stories of you talking about this, and I know we haven't got time to cover them all, but what are the sort of things that you really learned from that process and that environment that really aided you moving forwards?
Yes, I stayed with the Japanese company YKK. They were fantastic people for 20 years. In that time, I trained 5 factory managers in 20 years on HR, because they didn't have much HR in Japan, but they needed to know. But I learned so much from them, Stuart. I mean, really, in all fairness, the little things which are important, which I didn't think were important, was important to them. So much so, I think things such as business cards. We all have business cards. And when you have a business card, we put them on the table. In Japan, and when they're around the table, people will ask the ages of the people around the table. And in 1980, I cringed at that, because we had ladies around the table. Do we ask their age? And it was important to establish who was the oldest person around the table. Not who was the most influential person, but who was the oldest person, and to give them the respect that they were due. And so their business cards were placed around in seniority, and you knew who, without even speaking a word, you knew who were the important people around the table. The most important thing about all that is when the meeting was over, once the business cards had been picked up, the meeting was finished totally. So we had the meeting cards, or your business cards, on the table to identify who the people were. The meeting was concluded and they were taken away. But what I learned is that when you went into the meeting, there was no yes and there was no no. You went into the meeting to listen to other people, to establish what they wanted out of life, what they wanted out of business, and how would that help us, and how could we help them. So I think that was fundamentally one of the most important things. And I learned, I picked up a saying during COVID. I've learned that people may forget what you said, people may forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think the Japanese people have got that ability to make people feel that they are listening to them and to nobody else at the time. The other thing which is interesting, one of the bad manners in Japan is to offer unsolicited advice. Now, I'm from Liverpool, as the accent will tell you. You have never heard of a person from Liverpool not offering unsolicited advice. We can't stop ourselves, I'm afraid. But I stayed with them for 20 years, so I must have been doing something right.
Yeah, amazing.
Brilliant people, brilliant business people, and learned so much.
Yeah, fantastic. So I've a couple of questions pop up. And again, we had my dad came on to the 50th episode, and he's retired, similar to yourself, and it's amazing to hear the similarities, but also the differences in sort of like eras, generations. Yeah. And it's been mentioned quite a few times with some of the experts as well. And I think there might be a little bit of a drag curve on this regards to leadership changing quite a lot. And I would love to know your thoughts on that, how you've seen leadership or how people are delivering leadership in your time. Obviously, I know it's very different now, but what do you see the differences, and how have you seen it evolve over your time?
Interesting question, because really leadership is one of those things that is probably geared to the situation in some cases. A war, we have one different type of leadership, where in peacetime we have another type of leadership. And I think it's important basically that we develop the leadership based on the situation. And we should never be afraid to look backwards and to see what types of leadership worked at that specific time. I believe, Churchill, I have a great respect for that man in terms of the leadership at that time needed a person of that sort of with his capacity. And I realized that a lot of his leadership was his ability to speak, because he had the best command of the English language probably in the country at the time. So his ability to speak and to use phrases, and I still use some of his phrases even today. It's interesting. So I think, to answer the question more fully, I think we really need to ensure that we look for the leadership needed at that time. And I think probably what you're doing,
Don't worry.
I think at your time, what's going on, but more than anything else, is that we find the leadership that is needed today, because the young people, young managers and people of today have come through a totally different educational system, i.e. mainly university and what have you. So I think what we need to do is to attract and look at the leadership that is going on. And as I did with Japan, with YKK, look to the countries or to the areas or to the parts of the world that we can gain their leadership and their skills and bring them into our way of life. I'm not saying change your way of life at all in any part of the world. Use them and bring them in here and let's use it. And my main leadership at the moment is I have 4 grandchildren, one daughter, 4 grandchildren. And my leadership is basically going forward is not do this, do that, is show what I would do in a situation and just do it. And I think leadership is more about showing people what is available and allowing them to choose which way it goes.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've mentioned that at the last minute as well, because it's a passion of mine to share different stories and different perspectives. And when we're leading and driving our children, our brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, I just sometimes call them smaller people, growing, developing, whatever. It's so impactful how the transferable skill of leadership can be put across with like listening. It's not about you, it's about them. And then, yeah, amazing. And I like the fact that you said there about the situation, because my big thing is about upskilling people in their self and situational awareness. because, and again, how true is that about like, look for what's not being said? I say about the listening skills. So I could keep going on. So we've got 1 minute left. 1 minute left.
Right,
is there anything else you can add to the audience to level up their leadership? What would be the couple of takeaways that you would pass on forward to a new generation of leaders?
I think basically the first thing is what are you doing today that's getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow? Because where you want to be tomorrow is showing other people where they can be tomorrow. I think that's so important. I believe basically that we need a challenge, we need a goal, and that's the question you asked really. What do you want? What is the goal? And I think the goal is to find out what is it that you can do, they can do, that will move things forward tomorrow. And I've used that in a couple of ways. In the first job when I was training apprentices was to bring in a Duke-Evans award scheme. So to train apprentices or young people to be better than they are now. Later on in YKK, it was different altogether. It was something about taking our people away to Derbyshire and showing them what we were where we were trying to get, where the business was trying to get, and where they should get. It was never about what they had to do. It was more about what was available. And try and develop the individuals more importantly than the business, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it just fits into that. I think I like to say like empowering people, isn't it? Not directing people, it's empowering people to give them the options. So yeah, amazing. Alan, thank you so much for your time today. It flies by when we're telling great stories and great experience. So guys, if you've enjoyed that, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I'm going to put Alan's links below in the comments. And if you're listening to us on your podcast provider, make sure you follow us. And please, guys, share in the comments what you got from this episode. It's really great to hear. Everybody gets something slightly different, and that's what I'd like to bring, sort of like to be able to change your perspective, look at somebody else's journey to then see how much it can impact on yours. So Alan, thank you so much for your time this morning.
That's good. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for the invite.
No problem at all, guys. I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.